Hello and welcome to the 31st Scouching Report for the 2020 NHL Draft. Today we're going to be looking at TPS Turku defenseman Samuel Knazko, currently ranked 42nd amongst European skaters by NHL Central Scouting. Now you might look at Knazko's production, his size, and the fact that he really only played at the under 20 level this year in Finland, and it can be pretty easy to see why Samuel Knazko might not be ranked particularly high. But this is a player who I saw play at the under 18s last spring, and he really did impress me, especially for a player that is so young. And with some really promising results through the first half of this season, I took a really close look at Knazko, and I think there could be some really good value here, so let's see what I found. So if you've never seen a Scouching Report before, the way that we break down a prospect is we look at 5 separate categories: think, move, get, pass, and shoot. Within each one of these categories, we give the prospect a number and a letter grade, where the number indicates the overall tier of talent across the 7 games that I saw, and the letter indicates the overall consistency within that tier across those 7 games. So first we look at the think category, and to me, Samuel Knazko is really one of a kind when you look at all of the defensemen available this year. I am pretty confident saying that there is not a single defenseman out there who is more aggressive offensively than Samuel Knazko, and that is especially true in the offensive zone. Of all of the defensemen I've tracked this year, he is the most active, stepping up from the blue line in the offensive zone to participate offensively. Even in the early stages of an offensive breakout for the other team, Knazko will step up deep into the offensive zone and try to break up that breakup more often than anyone I've seen this year. And where I think he carries value is that when he makes the decision to do so, there is absolutely no hesitation. He can stick to trailing forwards if that early pinch doesn't work, and he can at least be competent positionally in the defensive end to try to close off those high and medium danger areas. And as we'll see as a theme in this video, I think it's perfectly reasonable to look at a player like Samuel Knazko and his approach to the game and find it reckless, but I think that just to me indicates that he just needs the right system in which to develop. I think that this is the type of defenseman that can actually be enabled to do what he does best more often. His tendency to jump into the offensive zone to snuff out breakouts also translates to when he has the puck from the blue line as well. He'll step deep into the offensive zone and really try to act as another forward. He's perfectly capable of going deep in the offensive zone, behind the goal line and around the net to try to open up defensive systems and thread passes through the offensive zone there. And on that note of passing, Knazko is just a highly active quarterback with the puck on his own stick. He is the second most active attempter of passes that I've tracked this season behind Anton Johannesson, but as is typical with most pass-first defensemen who really like to push play aggressively, he can get himself into quite a lot of trouble a little bit too often by waiting too much to really open up a passing option. Quickening his decision making is something that I think is going to need to come a few steps for Knazko if he's ever going to translate to North America. He also had a bit of a tendency to throw pass attempts into a ton of traffic and just make poor reads with his pass attempts, but there were a lot of times where I felt that he would make a read, decide that there wasn't really a good chance of him connecting on any passes or making those transitions with the puck on his own stick, and he would circle back in the defensive zone and try another pass. And there were brief moments of complete positional collapse in the defensive zone, but not only do I feel like that was something that was relatively rare, the rate at which Knazko faced dangerous shot attempts against was 34th in my whole sample, which is higher than just middle of the pack. So all things considered, he is suppressing defense at least at a decent rate. So that indicates to me that his overall results might be a little bit more positive than some people might think just by looking at how he plays the game. So in the think category, I'm optimistically giving Samuel Knazko a 1D here. I really think that this is a player that brings a very unique approach to the position of defense, and in the right system and with the right developmental path, I think he could be a really fascinating defenseman to keep track of as he enters the NHL. He is as aggressive a defender at the offensive blue line as I have tracked all season. He has the second most transitions both offensively and defensively across his offensive blue line that I've tracked all year amongst defensemen, and compared to the average rate of offensive blue line transitions, he's 32% higher than average. So to me, this might be a little bit of a matter of taste. To a lot of people, he might be too risky, but to me, he's more of a curious case, and if this is a guy you can get in the middle rounds, I really think he might be worth the swing. And one thing that surprised me is that the aggressiveness that he showed, while still just in the Finnish under 20 league, still put him as the 3rd best defenseman that I have tracked when it comes to shutting down defensive transitions. So that aggressiveness, at least at that level, seems to be paying off, and I think that if you can raise the floor of his talent in other areas of the game, which we'll get to shortly, I think you could find a really interesting, underrated defensive player here. Next, we go to the move category. I would categorize Samuel Knazko's ability to move around the ice as, well, solid, especially when he's using his turns and his general fluidity on his feet, making pivots from forward to backwards and backwards to forwards. I think he can cover a lot of ice at least solidly well. But I think just across the board, there's going to need to be improvements for Knazko if he's ever going to be this type of defenseman in the National Hockey League. He's quick, but not extremely quick. He's explosive, but not extremely explosive. In a straight line, he has a bit of trouble generating speed, but on his turns, when he's wheeling up in the defensive end or stepping up from the offensive blue line with a little turn, he can generate some solid power with his lower body. But one thing he does do pretty well that I saw was that when he does push in the offensive zone, he does protect the puck pretty well. But it felt like far too often with Knazko, he wanted to be a high-skill, high-octane defender, but just didn't have the tools quite yet to pull it off. There were times where I also felt that he was trying to put too much responsibility on his own stick, ignoring line mates on breakout opportunities, and just try to use his relatively underwhelming skating to push pucks up the ice on his own stick. And that goes back to just making clear reads very quickly to just maintain possession of the puck a little bit more often. And one thing to note with Knazko, and I think this feeds off of just how young he is, relative to the first few games that I tracked towards the end of my tracking, Knazko improved his rate of controlled offensive zone transitions significantly. In his first 3 games, he generated 30 controlled offensive zone entries per 60, but in his last 4 games, he raised that rate to 45. So I do think that managing the game intelligently to maintain possession was something that did come a few steps over the course of this season, and that's a trend that I hope will continue into the future. So in the move category, I'm giving Knazko a 2C. Overall, it's a little bit of a mixed bag here. And yes, he's a project, but I think that this is a project that's worth working on and being patient and trying to develop into the best player that he can be. He's got the ability to generate speed through his turns in the defensive zone and wheel up for an offensive rush, but he really seemed to lack that standing start explosiveness and raw power from his lower body. And compared to other exciting, high-octane offensive defenders that I've seen this year, his skill level is a few steps below some other more exciting players that I've tracked this season. So I think that raising the floor of talent here with some fundamental skills and skating training should help him enable better offensive transitions over time, which was a trend that he already was capturing. Next we go to the get category, and as I mentioned in the think category, Knazko is, on paper, one of the best suppressors of defensive transitions that I've tracked all season. Of everyone that I've tracked this year, he was 4th in the number of defensive zone transitions that he was involved in per 60 minutes. But when you remove uncontrolled defensive zone transitions, he dropped all the way to 51st. And a defensive controlled zone transition percentage under 30% like what Knazko is remarkable. Only 6 players I've tracked this year are 30% or better in this area of the game, and none of them are named Jake Sanderson. He absolutely does not hesitate to step up on breakouts and try to apply pressure as quickly as he can. When it comes to straightforward attacking scenarios across blue lines, he makes excellent reads, able to get inside on forecheckers and sweep pucks right off of their stick without really needing too much physical contact. He's able to close those gaps quickly and use his stick effectively to separate pucks from forecheckers. As well in the neutral zone, I felt that he showed excellent positional awareness, able to knock down pucks with really good hand-eye coordination and shut down breakouts that way. And you may look at the high danger shot attempt percentage that Knazko registered while he was on the ice and see 33% and think he's terrible in his own end. And yes, there were times where Knazko was just plain physically ineffective, and in terms of facing high danger shot attempts against, he did face the 8th most of any player I've tracked this year. But a lot of that percentage also can be drawn up to TPS with Knazko on the ice being 59th in terms of generating high danger shot attempts per 60 minutes in the offensive direction. But I will admit that his natural approach to the game, especially against faster opponents, could really leave him behind in that neutral zone and cause a lot of odd man rushes coming his way. But that might be something that you just either have to live with or work around, because it worked far more often than it didn't. And Knazko wasn't a player who would just give up on those missed opportunities, as he would back check quickly and try to get himself involved defensively from there. But for you traditional traditionalists out there, he is perfectly capable of taking the foot off the gas pedal a little bit, letting the opponent come to him and managing those gaps more traditionally, but still being able to use that aggressive mindset to pinch up quickly and separate pucks from forecheckers then. So in the get category, again I'm giving Knazko an optimistic 1D. To me, this is a part of the game where to the eye, it can look like Samuel Knazko is a reckless defender with no potential future in professional hockey. But when I see Samuel Knazko play and track the data that he generates, I see a player who is aggressive and it actually works for him. Is aggressive, but I felt that his team covered for him more than capably, and I think that's a trend that's going to need to continue if you draft him. And even when he played the more traditional side of defending, he still looked pretty good doing it and shut down a lot of breakouts that way. But I do admit that I am questioning just how much of this game is going to project. Samuel Knazko is a long-term project, and you're going to need to build on some fundamental skills for him to be this effective at higher levels. But this is a profile that I think you can bet on even in this area of the game where to the eye he might look a little bit reckless. So while this might not be a player where I want 6 clones of him throughout my entire defense core, this could be a player that brings a different flavor to a defense group and also brings a different style that might be a little bit more difficult for opponents to counter. But at his core, he is certainly very fun to watch, even in this category, and similar to a player like Anton Johannesson, there are measurable deficiencies with Samuel Knazko, but in my work I felt that the pros outweighed the cons in his case. And speaking of Anton Johannesson, Samuel Knazko is the only player I've tracked this year that attempts more passes per 60 minutes than Anton Johannesson completes. With a combination of 109 pass attempts at 5-on-5 per 60 minutes and completing 78% of them, that puts him second when it comes to completing passes and attempting passes, and to me that's a pretty good thing. He reads the ice extremely well. He doesn't make poor decisions a tremendous amount of times with really good shoulder checks, able to read the ice and ingest potential breakouts. When he keeps his game simple and no nonsense, that's when he seems to thrive away from the offensive zone. And when he is in the offensive zone, he is the only defenseman that I've tracked this year that can hold a candle to Anton Johannesson's dangerous passing rate. And that dangerous passing rate for Knazko is still 14% better than Jake Sanderson's was. In the offensive zone, when he pinches up with the puck on his own stick, he can draw opponents and draw attention to himself, and his teammates can fill in the extra space that's been created that way. He can wrap around the back of the net and send pucks out in front of the net just like he's another forward on the ice. So when Knazko just has his head on straight, surveys the ice, and just makes quick, effective reads and pass attempts, he's a very effective quarterback when he's on the ice and really dialed in. But there are times where when he's applied with a lot of pressure, his lack of strength can really let him down. This is a guy who's going to need to put strength on his frame or make quick reads every single time he touches the puck if he's ever going to be a successful puck mover in the NHL. But while he could create the odd turnover here and there, the fact of the matter is that he's passing the puck a lot and completing a lot of those pass attempts. So in the pass category, I'm giving Knazko a 1C. I think there's a lot to like here with him. He had tremendous passing results when he just kept his game simple in all 3 zones. And it was tons of fun to see him pinch up in the offensive zone more often than a lot of defenders, play aggressively, try to open up space in defensive tactical systems, find teammates filling up that open space, and trying to generate offensive chances himself. But while he picked his spots to do so pretty well, there were moments where I felt he lacked a little bit of awareness and just kind of felt like he was dawdling a little bit around the ice, and that led to a lot of unnecessary pressure that I didn't really feel Knazko handled particularly well. And that tendency might hold him back from being just as good of a puck mover as I think he could be. Finally, we look at the shoot category, and with Knazko, this gets a really big shrug from me, I guess. He averaged under 2 shot attempts per game off of his own stick, and it is blatantly obvious that this is a player that prefers to pass the puck rather than shoot it, and for a defenseman, I don't see that as a bad thing at all. And right now, he doesn't really have the skill or agility or strength on his feet to step up from the offensive blue line and get into dangerous areas to generate shot attempts himself. He's much better driving wide, protecting pucks, getting deep below the goal line, and trying to make plays from there. If he did see open ice in front of him, he did have the capability of stepping up a little bit, but across the 7 games I tracked, that only happened once. So in the shoot category, I don't really know what to give him, so I'll just give him a 3B. This skill did not come out a tremendous amount, so it's kind of hard to really gauge what he's capable of, but from my perspective, at least at 5-on-5, I didn't see a whole lot to really be positive or negative about because, well, he didn't shoot the puck a whole lot. And there's a reason the shoot category comes last, and that reason is exacerbated by defensemen. Lobbing pucks on net from the blue line is rarely advisable unless you're sure you can create a lot of havoc in front of the net with that shot attempt. Knazko doesn't really do that, and sometimes stepping up from the offensive blue line with some speed and skill moves as a defenseman can burn you in terms of causing turnovers doing so, as we saw with a player like William Wallander. But to me, it felt like Knazko was smart enough to know his own limitations and know what he's good at. And as an offensive playmaking defenseman, from time to time, I felt that he was much more impressive in that area of the game. So the way we finish these reports is we look at the best part of a player's game, the good part of a player's game, and the not so good part of a player's game. The best part of Samuel Knazko's game, to me, is what people might think is the worst part of his game. His overall approach to playing the position of defense is really fascinating, exciting, and really interesting. He's an aggressive, intense defensive transition defender who's able to shut down defensive transitions one way or the other through that aggression. He steps into the offensive zone to extinguish potential breakouts more often than any defenseman that I've tracked this year. And in the right NHL system with the right group of forwards around him, I think that could really make him an interesting offensive defender. The good part of his game is his overall reliability moving pucks around the ice. He's a rock-solid quarterback when it comes to moving pucks from one player to another. There weren't a ton of passes around the ice that I really felt were worth saving to put in this video, but personally I don't find that necessarily a bad thing. He was passing the puck a ton, completing a ton of passes, and just facilitating good possession every single time he touched the puck. And to me, for Knazko, moving forward, he's really going to need to lean into the passing side of his game rather than the carrying, especially if his skating and skill doesn't really come the way that it needs to. But his vision, his reliability, and his decision latency are all solid building blocks to work with. The not so good part is that the fundamental ability for Knazko to push pace really well is not something that I would say is a hallmark of his game. He seemed a step or two too slow even at the finish under 20 level, even with a ton of open ice in front of him. Straight line speed generation really felt like an issue for Knazko. He seemed to not quite have the high-end skill that some other high-end defenders in this draft have, and when you compare that lack of ability to his overall style of play, I think there's genuine cause for concern. But we're talking about a player that probably won't even come over to North America for at least another 2 or 3 seasons. So overall, I'm giving Samuel Knazko a 2B. This might be kinda rich for a lot of people, but this is a player that I really believe in. There's risk, but I think the downsides to his game on the ice can be mitigated through basic training protocols. His defensive results, his passing results, and his overall approach to the game are unlike anyone I've tracked this year, and he's been a fascinating player for me to watch. And if the only things that really need to come a step is his strength in his lower body and just being more solid on his frame, I think considering how young he is, he has plenty of runway to develop. And what's strange with Knazko is that in the defensive part of the game, it feels like he's offensive, but in the offensive part of the game, he feels more defensive. When he's playing defensively, he pinches hard extremely often, even in the offensive zone, more often than anyone that I've seen. Offensively, with the puck on his own stick, he doesn't really push up the middle of the ice and try to generate a lot of scoring chances on his own stick a whole lot. He can push up in the offensive zone below the goal line, try to make a play from there, but it still feels quite conservative as he's able to cover that ice and get back to the blue line pretty quickly. So while Knazko right now isn't the speediest or most skilled player that I've seen, I was really struck with how smart he seemed to be and how reliable he was considering the style of play that he brings. And if it does work out for him, I think he could be a very interesting brand of defenseman for a National Hockey League team to think about moving forward. I think that if you're patient and surround him with the right tactical system and the right group of players around him, I think he could be an interesting offensive defenseman at the next level that can drive good defensive results through his offensive play. So that's all for this Scouching Report. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, you can click all the buttons below me so you never miss another one. If you really liked it, you could subscribe on Patreon or here on YouTube by clicking join below. You'll get access to a Discord server, visualizations that are exclusive for patrons, data sheets for hundreds of drafted and undrafted prospects, merchandise discounts, and plenty of other goodies. Or you could pick up some merchandise from the Scouchwear shop, where 50% of the profits go to the Women's Sports Foundation. So that's all, and thanks for watching.